Okay, we've got some dual color printing today. I want to go over to the printer pretty quick because it's got some really loud fans, and so I've got to turn it off before we go too far. But so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. This printer is printing in two different colors. Right now it's printing the red, I think it's printing the red color. Oh yeah, red. It's printing the red color right now. And it's almost finished this layer, so I'll show you kind of how it switches between the colors, and then we'll turn it off because it is rather loud. But this is called an IDEX, Independent Dual Extruder, so the EX part is extruder, but there aren't too many like this. There are a couple, but they are independent, but they both exist on this same rail, so they're not completely independent. It's not like two totally separate heads, but there are two totally separate heads, but they're connected on the same rail. Any minute now, I didn't time it right, I guess, but any minute now it's going to switch over to the second extruder. There are other machines that do similar things with multiple extruders. There are some that where the extruders are not independent, they're just side by side on the same carriage. I do have one of those, but it's not here. I don't know if we'll get to see it or not. Maybe I can figure out a way to look at it. There are others that are tool changers, kind of like on a CNC machine where it goes and grabs different mill bits or whatever. There are some that do that. Actually, there's not many that do that. There's a handful that do that. And then there are a couple. This is an older printer. I don't even know if this printer is supported any longer. This is the JG Maker IDEX D, I think is what it's called. It was kind of the first one you could get that was consumer level and independent extruder. Maybe not the first, but if not one, it was certainly one of the first ones you could get without building your own. And in a second here, you'll see the second extruder. It'll look exactly like this one, and it'll come in. This one will go over here and park right there. Those little brushes over there are for wiping the nozzle clean. One good thing about these is that you do have two completely different extruders, so you can have completely different materials. You can have a flexible and a rigid, a support material and a model material. You can have two different colors like what I have now. Both of these are PLA, but they don't waste as much. You don't have to purge through the nozzle like you have one color and you got to purge that color out to get the new color in. You don't have to really do that with the independent nozzle type. Oh, you know what? It's printing a solid layer. That's why it's not going to switch. It might be a minute before it switches. I don't know if I can speed it up here. Let's see. Tune, speed. Let's go. I'm not too worried about the surface quality here, so let's speed it up some and see if we can just get it to switch to the next color. I don't remember how many intermediate layers it has between the thing. It's not very thick, so I just made it in Tinkercad. We'll look at how to make and slice these models also. I am using the Idea Maker slicer, which it's still out there. It's still available. It is not it was gaining popularity there for a while, and now it's kind of stagnant. It is a good slicer though. It is it's the one I showed you that has the ability to emboss textures onto the surface of a model without having to go and create the geometry. It does it for you. Or, well, it doesn't create geometry, but it modifies the G code to look like it changed the base geometry. Looks like it's still doing okay here on it. It's doing infill is basically all it's doing right now. So these are kind of handy. Obviously they're limited by there's a dual extruder, or the tool changer ones might have 5 or 6 extruders. So it is hardware limited. You know, it's a little bit more, a lot more parts to go wrong and things like that. Like I said, this particular one is not very well supported anymore. It looks like most of the multicolor printers have gone to some kind of automatic filament changing system. So Bamboo Lab has a I think they call it AWS or AMS. I don't remember what the unit is called, but it's maybe AMS, Automatic Material Selector. I don't know. We'll look at that at some point. I don't have one of those printers, although they do look really nice. Where it's just rolls, I think 5 rolls of filament in a container, and the correct filament is selected and sent to the single nozzle. That's sort of like what Prusa does with their MMU, and that's a good process. It does require some purging because you have one nozzle, and every time you change material or color, you got to purge the old material out and put the new material in, so it wastes a lot more than these independent extruder type do. But there are fewer parts to go wrong, and you can have more colors more easily. It does seem like maybe the way to go. There is one other way that I've seen printers use, and only maybe a Da Vinci printer is the only one that I've seen try this, where you take a neutral color like a white or a maybe even not tinted at all, and you colorize it as it's going into the nozzle with like an inkjet printer type nozzle or markers or things like that. And I do not think that is going to take off. It's been around many years now, and it hasn't really made any progress, and I don't even know if they still sell the thing. Maybe I'll look and see if the Da Vinci, I think it was a Da Vinci color printer. Let's see if that's still even a thing. It is still out there. It's got a 2-star out of 5-star review, but it is still out there. It's kind of expensive, $1,800 for the used one, but it does still exist. I don't want to. It looks like we're getting close to it going back to the other nozzle, so I don't want to switch to this yet, but I'll show you what it does here in a second. But that is the only other kind that I've seen that's completely different. There are other types of printers, like laser printers, resin printers, even powder-based printers that are color, that do a different process in full color. But this is kind of what we have, is this multi-material setup, or the independent extruder setup are the ones that are competing right now, with the multi-material setup winning currently. But we will look at this Da Vinci thing. I have used a Da Vinci printer before, and it was okay. I have not used one of these color ones. They were a cheap printer that was all assembled early on. Like early on, the consumer printers, you had to assemble almost from scratch, some of them. And then they got to the style where you just basically put the gantry on. But these Da Vincis were completely assembled. You know, they were just a box. They were enclosed. They were good for like little maker spaces or schools or places like that, where you didn't really want to assemble a whole lot, and you didn't want the fumes out in the whole room. So they were good for that. And they were cheap, pretty cheap. So they do have a place. I don't know if clearly they're still a company, because they have products out there to sell. But I don't know. Oh, there we go. There's the tool change. So here comes extruder 2. I don't have it quite calibrated correctly right now. It's a little too high, so I need to drop it down to get it to work the way it should. But that's kind of the process. The one parks on one side, and then the other one is over here, completely separate, but constrained by the same rail. They're on the same rail here. You can see they both have 2 independent belts. They can operate at the same time. So you can have this extruder and this one on 2 different sides of the bed, printing the same object or mirror images of the same object. So you can speed up production if you're trying to print multiple copies of the same thing. There it's going. Now it's going to change more often because the layers are, it's not solid red in the middle, or it's not on the solid red layers. So you kind of see this is just it writes a blue 10 on a red background is all it does. So you can print 2 copies of things, or one of them as a mirror image of the other one. Same object though, because they do have to move, the Y bed is not independent, so they have to move that direction the same. But it can print copies or mirror images if you need it to. So they're interesting. Like I said, I don't even know if you can still get this particular one. Let's see if it's still out there for sale. You can still buy them, yeah. I think it's a slightly newer, updated version. They're like $500, $400 on Amazon. There's the Artist Pro. There is a Pro version now, which has a better screen than this one has, and maybe a few upgrades, but and it's got a large build volume. If you just use it as a single nozzle printer, this bed is a 300 by 300 millimeter, and you've got 340. You can't even see all the height it has. 340 millimeter height. It's got dual Z screws, so it keeps your gantry level. So it does have some nice features. If you're looking for a big printer that has a little bit different features, then it might be one that you could pick up. I've done a lot to keep it running because I need to change these fans out. They're so loud. That's not the fans on here. That's the fans for the power supply that you hear, and so they don't need to be quite so loud. These fans are sort of loud also. Those could probably be changed and make it a lot quieter. The motion control and everything is actually pretty quiet. The steppers aren't loud, but the fans are so loud, so it can get annoying if it's right beside you all the time. Let's see. Well, we've seen it do its thing. I think I will shut it down, and just so we get it quieter. I'm not sure. It's actually relatively close to finished. Maybe I'll speed it up some more. It's at 150%, but I was going relatively slow. Maybe we can just go ahead and finish it off if I speed it up 200% or so. Maybe 250. I think I was printing at like 40 millimeters a second, so that's not that much. So I think it can handle that. I have changed the nozzles on these because well, I wanted larger diameter nozzles, so I actually had to drill out standard size nozzles. I couldn't find larger diameter ones. They have a unique nozzle setup. It's actually kind of interesting. This little button right here, this one, lets you just drop the nozzle out, and you can slide a new one in. So that's kind of nice, except they didn't have the size I wanted, so I had to get a tiny little 0.6 millimeter drill bit and drill out the nozzles to where they were the size I wanted. So I think they ended up like 0.57 millimeters, so they're a little undersized, and I just never went and drilled them again. But you can do that. Like if you have a bunch of brass nozzles, they can be hard and steel. It's going to be harder to drill. But if you have a bunch of brass nozzles and you want a particular size, find the right size drill bit. It doesn't have to be anything special. You do want to measure it. It's nicer if you can measure, like if you have a way to measure the actual diameter you end up with, because sometimes drilling, you don't get it perfectly lined up and it's a little bit larger than what you anticipated, or maybe your drill bits are a little undersized or whatever. That's how I knew that mine was a 0.57. I have a set of pin gauges that will measure the diameter of something tiny. And so I did measure mine, but you can drill out any nozzle if you want to and make it a larger nozzle. Let's see. It does look, I think we'll let it finish since it's so close. I think it won't take that much longer for it to finish. I will look at the other things over here while it's doing its thing. Here it is. It looks like on Amazon. Oh, I didn't mention they are direct drive extruders also, so they're relatively nice. They're just harder to, deal with because they use a special nozzle. Again, 3 out of 5. They're going to have kind of poor ratings. I don't think the firmware has been updated in a while. This is the older one with the plain screen, not the touch screen. So there is a Pro version that has a few upgrades to it. And the community has kind of helped deal with it. These little boxes, let's see. I'm not going to point out them over here. These little boxes underneath the filament that the filament's running through, those are filament runout sensors. If you could see mine, I actually just have them plugged up with filament because they're at such a weird angle. They cause the filament to come in and twist, and it kept snapping the filament inside the runout sensor. So I just don't use them because they were in an awkward position, and I haven't bothered to reposition them or redesign them in any way. So I just put some filament in there, and it always thinks it has filament, so they're not operable. So it's a little bit expensive. I don't think there's a cheaper dual extruder printer out there. So if you're interested in independent dual extrusion, then this might be the cheapest way to get into it. There's some, I don't think those are actual prints. I think those are computer renders there. But there's the different modes. It can double, dual extrude, mirror, or just print one thing at a time. It does have linear rails. That's nice. Those are generally on higher end printers. There you can kind of get an idea, this direct drive, well, this picture over here, you can kind of get a direct picture of how this nozzle, all of this pink part will drop out of there. I don't know if they show that separately. I don't see it, but it will drop out and you can just put a different size nozzle in really easily. There is another company that is doing a similar thing. Oh, it's finished up. So it finished. It did that. I'm going to turn it off. Oh, there we go. So it's quite a bit different without the fan going. So I've got a little bit of alignment to do on it. I don't print on this one all that often, but basically that's what you get. You can get dual-sided prints with multicolor. This is similar to what we did last time, where we just printed one color on top of the other one, except this one the colors are mixed throughout, and so you can get a little bit different effects than what you get with just the one color on top of the other one. Another way that you can get dual color is that DaVinci. Here it is. I have not tried one of these. They're too expensive and they look too finicky, but here's what they have. They have basically something very similar to a color nozzle on a inkjet printer. So CMYK, so cyan, magenta, yellow, and black pigment that colorizes the filament. Oh wait, hold up, you're not looking at it. There we go. So this little guy right here is a inkjet printer that prints onto the plain filament as it's passing or about to pass through the nozzle, and so it comes out colored, and you get full color prints. They typically, the ones I've seen are a little bit muted, like the colors are a little bit muted. I'm sure they've done some photo editing to get these as, you know, bright as they can, but even in here you can see that they're a little bit muted on the colors. But it does exist. Not tried one, but that's a completely different way of trying to get, there's no waste because all the filament is colored as it's coming out of the, or as it's about to go into the nozzle on demand. See what we do if we buy now. I think they're really expensive. Well, actually, there's there it is. The ink. I don't know where you buy the printer. That's materials. Let's see, products. Color series. It doesn't seem like it's very easy to purchase. Here, oh wow, yeah, out of stock and $3,500. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea here. You can kind of, this is more like what I've seen, where it's been pretty muted on the colors. Maybe you can find one used somewhere that somebody gave up on and bring it back to life. But it seems like most of them are doing the multi-material. Let me show you these. I think it's an AMS. This is what it looks like. Well, that's not. Here's the Bamboo Lab. This is the whole thing. So this is the Bamboo Lab with the AMS. I don't remember what they call it. Whatever the multi-material thing. Looks like there are 4. I thought they had one with 5, but this one has 4. There it is, AMS. These are, if you had the money for them, $1,500, and you needed to do color printing, these are good printers for that. They're high speed, they're Core XY, so the bed doesn't move back and forth. It moves up and down, and the print head moves in the XY plane really fast. The little Rook 2020 printer that we're building, which I have all the printed parts for. So now we can actually start assembling it. I'll show you those, or I'll show you some of them in a second. It's a Core XY printer. The Core XY is typically going to be a lot faster than the bed slinger type, because you don't have to move the bed back and forth. So the mass you're moving is just the print head. Most of them are direct drive, but some of them can be Bowden tube, so you're really not moving much weight around at all, and you can move it pretty quickly. So these are good printers, and the AMS part makes them good multicolor printers. 500 millimeters a second, these I can believe are real prints, multi-material prints here. These are actually just plain prints, but I've seen some really nice prints from them, but again, kind of expensive. So there's a Creality just released one in the same vein. I don't know if it's multi-material though or not. So they're a lot more expensive though, so you'd have to definitely not just buy them on a whim. There is, if you just wanted the high-speed printing, there is a baby brother to this thing. I think the P1P. It doesn't have the multi-material, this little guy. So I think you can add the multi-material. This one's not enclosed, so you have. But the cool thing with this one is they give you files. Let's see if it shows them. I don't see any. They give you the files where you can print custom side plates of all different types for these. So they actually have a way to enclose it. This is basically the bones of that big carbon printer. Same size and everything, I believe. And it's a good one if you're just wanting the Core XY high speed and you don't have $1,500, but you do have $600. It's a good printer. All right. What else are we doing today? That's the firmware for that printer we just looked at. Here's one thing you can do. So this filament is, the filament itself is multicolor. So as it comes out the nozzle, it actually prints, where's it at? Here it is. It actually prints multiple colors at one time. So this is a 3-color version, so it's got a yellow, a red, and a blue that are all part of the same filament. So it's 3 sides to the filament. Let's see if I can get the end of it. I don't know if I'll be able to show it to you very well or not, but is it going to focus on that? I don't think it's going to focus on something quite so small. Maybe it will, but you can kind of see how the filament is red and blue there, yellow on that side. So I haven't seen any more than 3 colors at a time, but I've seen some dual and some 3-color filaments. This particular one is from Sliceworks, and it's a silk, so it is shiny also. Maybe you don't want to go buy any of that. You can actually make your own. So you can make a dual color anyway. Maybe you can make there might be a tricolor one too, but you can actually print this. This is on printables.com. Oh, the link is off the top, but just go to printables.com and look dual filament custom. And what it is it is a similar to when we did the coin, where you print one layer, or well, print a couple of layers in one color, change out your filament, so you do a filament change, and then print your other material. There's the 2 different models you're printing, one on top of the other, and one of them you print in one color, so they did green first, and then they printed blue on top of that. So you're actually printing the filament. Now you take this and you load it into your printer, and you've got a dual color filament. So maybe you don't want to buy, there's several different sizes and lengths of this, but you'll get a little sample. You can't, I don't know how much it makes, but it does make enough to print some small little model. Or you could print multiple and join them together if you needed to make a longer strand. But that would be a way to play around with dual filament, assuming you had 2 filament colors that were compatible already. So they're coming out of the nozzle at the same time when they print, so they do have to both be PLA or both PETG, or they have to be compatible, because you couldn't have them working at different temperatures and coming out of the nozzle at the same time when you print the printed filament. So that is one way that you could do dual color without buying any filament. It's sort of random. Typically, it seems like on this one, the filament doesn't twist as it comes out of the nozzle. You can see some like striping here sometimes and not other times, but in general, the filament stays in whatever orientation. So one side of your print will be one color, and then another side will mostly be another color. Now, see, there is some bleed in there. And then another side will be the third color. Or if you had two, then one side will be one color and the other side will be the other color. So it gives you some interesting effects. Kind of hard to control what those effects look like, but you can see them. Let's look at the... I probably should have kept that open. Here's Tinkercad. Here's the little model. Actually, this is another model. This is similar to the model that we just printed. But what you do is, why don't we just make a new one of some sort? How do we make new here? Recent designs, paste. Let's go here. And we'll create a new 3D design. All right, again, I like using Tinkercad just when I'm doing something quick, because it is quick. I don't have to worry about it. Let's just get some... I'm not even too concerned with what it is. Let's use a new tool. Let's use the squiggle. So this one, the little squiggle tool, lets you actually draw the thing you want it to extrude. You don't have a whole lot of control, but you can kind of draw something on there. Let's see what... I don't even know what to put on here, but let's do... I don't know. So you just draw some shape that you want. It's going to be, you know, it is hand drawn or mouse drawn, so it's not going to be too perfect. Actually, let's just make it, I don't know, kind of smooth out. And we'll just make some random shapes. Oh wait, it erases. You have to do a tool. There we go. We just have some random shape. And then you click done, and now you've got this random thing that you can do something with. So you need two of these. So how these slicers work with dual color is, and there are different ones. So some slicers let you just go in and paint, like you take a STL, a solid model, and you can go in and paint different surfaces. I know Prusa Slicer does that. I don't think Idea Maker does that. Cura, I don't know if Cura has a paint tool. I think Prusa Slicer is the multi-material one that has paint on colors. Most of the others do, they're actually separate models. Each color is its own model. So this would be two different models here. So we could duplicate this one so that we have two of them, make one of them in the cutout, and then we could cut out a hole here, and then we could put in our thing. And now we've got a model with two. We didn't join these two, but we've got two colors. And when we go to export it, we can export just the selected shape as a STL. Then we can go select the other thing, export just that as a STL. Actually, I guess we could do that. So let's export STL, and then click the other one, export STL. So now I have two different STL files. They're lined up on my origin here so that if I merge them, they'll overlap the right way. Then we can go over to, let's get rid of these. We can import models. I don't know what those were. Oh yeah, it gives it these crazy names. So there's our two models. We can select them, right click, and align selected models. So as long as they were aligned in the program that made them, their origins should align to where now they're the same. They're aligned correctly. Now I just assign one of them. There's the left extruder. Apparently that's the red one. And I'll assign that one to the right extruder. And I will have a multicolor model when I go to slice and print it. So I would start slicing. I got my multi-material printer selected here, and I slice it. I don't know what my layer height was or anything. Preview it, and then oh, it's barely off the, well, down at the very bottom, it's off the window. I can make it where you can see everything. There we go. That's good enough. So we can show the extruder color, and it'll show which ones it's going to print. It's going to print my skirt in red, and then it's going to print just like that. So the two colors can be on the same layer. You don't have to stagger them like we were doing with the other coin we made. Same thing with those multi-material setups, you know, like the Bamboo Lab and the Prusa multi-material, or the palette, the Mosaic palette. I kind of think the Mosaic palette might be going away. I don't know. It's I haven't heard as much about it lately, but it's a add-on for any printer that does what we looked at with that Bamboo Lab, where there's multiple rolls of filament and they all feed into one device. Now it's a little bit different in that it actually welds the different filament strands together to make a long string of filament that goes into the one extruder nozzle. The others just chop them up and send them one after the other, which is all right too. But the palette welds them all together, and it will still need to purge, because that weld join will have kind of a mixture of colors, and so it does have a purge block that goes with it, so you waste material with it also. But kind of see what it would do. We could have dual colors that way. So that's kind of the process for these multi-extruder types of printers. This is also a process that would work for the multi-material ones also. But like I said, Prusa, I know in their slicer, it does let you just paint different areas, different colors, and then it figures out how it's going to feed in the different filaments at the right time, versus having to have two separate models. Sometimes it's hard to make different models for different color regions. You have more control that way, but it's harder to get the models to be sophisticated. It's a little bit harder to do. So that's a little bit of dual color. The other thing I wanted to talk about today might be short, I don't know. I wanted to show you some of our parts. These aren't actually parts for the printer, but I have a little bit. Oh, they're not on the thing. There they go. It's going to be hard to tell because it's actually hard to tell. These are clips for a little Pelican case that you can 3D print. This is just a almost, it's not transparent, it's maybe a little bit translucent, white-ish, although on your screen it looks like totally white, but it is not. And I did try to tint it with RIT dye. I think it'll work. I just need more concentrated dye. The main problem is, for that dye to work best, you need to heat the material that's being, heat the dye, which is the material is going to be submerged in, to like 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 150 degrees Fahrenheit is all PLA can take before it starts to deform on you. So you can't heat it up as much as it really needs, but it did tint it. So this piece in person, you can actually tell a slight difference. I don't know if I can maybe change the exposure to get them. Oh, not that way. You just can't tell. Maybe there you can kind of tell. And in person, it is very subtle too. Like by itself, I don't know that you would know. You'd notice. So this one is slightly bluer than the other one. Maybe if I get close enough, you can see that there's some difference there. It is not a lot. But I left it in the dye for maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. So I think if I leave it in longer, have more concentrated dye, and I'll just get it as hot as I can without, I don't want to have to reprint any parts, so I don't want that, but I do kind of want them to not just be plain, so even if I can get just a little tint, this color, here it is. This color is this, so it's maybe I would have been better off with a stronger color to begin with. This is tropical teal. This is, wow, we got way zoomed in. Zoom out some. So that is what it is. The synthetic one, which does work. There you can kind of start to see some colors. Now you can kind of tell it. Maybe it helps to have this next to it. But it does work. You just can't get the stuff up hot enough without potentially deforming your parts. Now, maybe if we had PETG, but I printed everything in PLA, so I'm not going to go back and print it all right now. Then we could get it a little bit hotter, and it might take to the die a little better. But I think what I'll do is I'll get it to about 150. I think I'm okay at 150 Fahrenheit. Typically, the PLA will soften around 70 Celsius. So what is that if you convert that? Let's see. 70 C to Fahrenheit is 158. So I can't go much higher than 150. And I don't think I can go to 200 without it just deforming. So we'll try and see, and we'll get what we get. So maybe it's going to be really thin. I did not use a lot of the dye. This is $4.99 for this bottle, so it's not terribly expensive if it will work. I'll use way more of the concentrated dye, get it as warm as I can, and then try to get all the parts in there and see how they come out. They might be all different tints. I know some of them will be different tints because I ran out of one color filament and I had another white-ish, and so I've got one that's like bright opaque white and the ones like this that are white but they're a little bit translucent, so I'm sure they'll dye differently, but it'll be fine. Most of them, the ones that are different, are going to be hidden, and then the other two are at least symmetric, that are the different colors, so it might look okay. The main point is that we get the thing built and that we are able to print with it. So just so let me show you again which one we're doing. Let's see. Oops, typed the wrong thing. We are doing, maybe it needs a space in this one. So we're building this little guy. So I've got all, I think I've got all. I may not have a bed for it. I might have to find a bed, but I think I've got everything else for this thing. It uses linear rails. It uses extruded aluminum 2020. That's where the 2020 comes from in its name. It's all open source, so you can just download the parts. All these green parts are what I've printed. So I've printed all the green parts. I've gathered up all of the other pieces that I think I need. I don't have little rubber feet for it, I don't think. So we might have to figure that out. Maybe we can print those using it. Use it because they don't look too big. It is going to be, I don't know if I'll use direct drive or not. So I might have to print it on one of these others to, you can print flexibles on non-direct drive printers. But I don't know if I want that to be the first print that this thing does. But I think I've got all the pieces for it. And we will start building that. I don't know if I'll build it on the stream, because that could get really monotonous of, you know, just trying to screw this stuff together. If you had to buy all of the pieces to build this, I think it would cost, the best I can tell, is around $200. I had most everything already, so it won't cost me that much, but there are pieces that, I think there's actually a kit now. I don't remember who makes it. Let's see if there's a kit out there for it. Yeah, Fabrico. They have a kit. So you can actually buy the thing. Now, I don't know if that's all of the hardware, like the board and everything. It does. Gates, belts, those are good. Pulleys, bearings. Does have the rubber feet. Bunch of hardware. bed springs, power supply. Got the motors. It doesn't look like doesn't have wires, so you might want that. You have to print your own parts. I didn't see where it had a controller board. Rook fan, bearings, rails, heater, Bowden tube, extruder. I don't see the controller board though. Maybe I'm just missing it, going too fast. It doesn't say, it just says anything else not listed above. That's interesting. I'm probably, oh, there it is right there. It's using the SK, that's the one I'm going to use, the SKR Mini E3 V3. That's a good board for a relatively cheap price. It's a 32-bit board, and it's a really nice one. If you have an Ender 3, it just drops into an Ender 3 and plugs up without any modification. So this is what we're building. Oh, I haven't printed the extruder housing. I don't think I've printed that. I do need to finish that up. But so you could just get the kit for $2.99 apparently. It is a small kit. Be aware that this print volume here is 100 by 100 by 100 millimeters. So it is not a big printer. You might could print a little bit. Might could get a little bit larger build in there, possibly, but it is not a big printer. But I'm okay with that. I don't really. I'm more interested in building it for one thing, and then in the Core XY that can be really fast. And I typically don't print very big parts. So that's a project that we're kind of working on. It's just taking us some while to. I want to figure out how to get these things tinted. I don't really want to just paint them. I think painting them might give me some tolerance issues, maybe. Plus, I don't know. I just don't want to paint them. So I want to tint them and go that route. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is it is probably time for you to start making sure that your printer is still working correctly. So I've made a list of regular or periodic maintenance things that you should at least check if you haven't done them. Clean the print bed. I've said this before, but if you haven't cleaned the bed, get you some isopropyl alcohol and clean it. I do that actually before most prints, but if you haven't been cleaning it and you're running into adhesion issues, that's probably why. Also, with the PEI beds, they will sometimes, I think don't use acetone on the PEI beds. You can on glass, but don't use it on the PEI beds. I think it'll remove some of the coating. But what you do on the PEI, you can use the isopropyl alcohol on PEI, that's fine. But if you get to where they just won't stick anymore, a really light rub with steel wool will usually reactivate, like it'll deoxidize the surface and it'll usually reactivate PEI for a while. So if your PEI sheets, they work great at the beginning and then they start losing stickiness and you just can't get stuff to stick to them, and you have cleaned them with isopropyl alcohol, the next step would be just warm soapy water, clean them with that, and if they still don't stick after that, then really light, you're not trying to like scrub it off, but really light steel wool across the top of it should reactivate it. I think it just deoxidizes it or something, but that will revive PEI sheets usually. I just had this issue on, let's make these bigger, on the one we're using in the class, where some of the screws, not ones that I had put in because most of it comes assembled now, but they will loosen over time potentially. So just every now and then check. The ones for me actually were ones I put in because they were on the Z axis, and it was just almost completely free. So I had to go back and tighten those up. So just, you don't have to go and manually try every screw, but just move things around, and if anything's wobbly, then you check and tighten up any screws or belts that are wearing on you. You shouldn't have to replace belts on these timing belts. Should last pretty much forever. Maybe, depending on how much printing you do, you might have to replace some roller wheels. They will wear. You'll see little black fuzzy things collecting on them. You can just wipe those off, but it could be that over enough time they will wear to the point that you have to replace those. I've never actually had to replace them. I usually end up with a different printer by the time that would happen, so it's usually not an issue, but it could be. Lubricate moving parts, so your Z-axis in particular on the Ender style printers. If you have linear rails, then those need grease occasionally. I use one of two things. I either use like dry lube. Let's make it bigger. Use this, so I can use that on the Z-axis. Sometimes I use the white lithium. Sometimes you just don't want something. I like the things where you can control it, because you don't want any of this to go on your print surface, or you don't want it where it can get on the print surface as it's printing, because obviously lubricants on the print surface are going to make things not stick very well. But occasionally you might want to make sure that the lubrication systems are doing okay. Particularly if you have like squeaking or anything like that, check for binds first. Like something might be binding too tight, but it won't hurt to put some lubricant on the parts that have to move relative to one another, the metal parts. Clean the extruder gear. So the little brass, usually it's brass, some of them are steel, gear with the little notches in it that drives the filament into the hot end. It will eventually clog up with chewed up filament. So it can just over time, it'll gradually eat some filament off of the filament as it comes in to the feeder. Or maybe you have a clog or something and it sits there and grinds on it. So it's if you have a wire brush, that'll clean it out. Otherwise, you can actually get just something sharp and individually trace the little notches and get that stuff out of there, the ground up filament. So every now and then it would have to get really clogged up for it to make a big difference, but any amount of clog in there means that you're getting a little less grip on the filament you're pushing into the hot end. The nozzle, particularly if you're running a brass nozzle, that even printing plain PLA, it will wear out at some point. It should be a long time, but if you're printing any abrasive stuff, then it's not going to be very long at all. But if you're noticing that the surface finish just isn't what it used to be, so it just doesn't seem right anymore, then it could be that the nozzle itself has worn to its a larger diameter. Let's see if I can find a side-by-side. There used to be a relatively good picture showing the wear. Well, that one's pretty extreme right here. Not only have they worn the hole larger, they have actually ground it down flat. I don't know what they did to do that. So they might have done that on purpose to do that. Or maybe they were, I don't know what they were doing. I don't see the little side-by-side picture I normally show. This is kind of what can happen though, right here. So you can kind of see where new 0.4 and new 0.6, and then here's a 0.6 that has been run through a lot of filament, and you can see it's gigantic compared to what it started as. That will happen. So even with regular printing materials, it will eventually happen. So It's tough to detect. You do usually, oh, I don't have it over here. You do usually get that little cleaning rod. Looks like an acupuncture. Actually, I think it is an acupuncture needle. But you get that usually with the kit, and if you put that into the nozzle and it's really sloppy, then it's probably worn. So I think they are typically about 0.4 millimeters. They might be slightly under 0.4, but they're pretty close to 0.4 millimeters already. If I had one handy, I'd measure it, but I don't know where there's one at right now. And so you could kind of get an idea if your nozzle is getting worn by if there's any slop between that and your nozzle. But that is one thing that you might have to do over time. The fans, they're going to collect dust, and that will make them less efficient if it's really dusty. So if they're clogged up with dust, they're not going to push as much air. Plus, it's going to put dust into your print, which you probably don't want. The electronics, there's usually nothing you need to do on the board itself, but the little power connector between your power supply and the printer is XTC60, I think is what they're called. Maybe it's XT, no C in there, just XT. This little guy. On the Ender 3s in particular, but any of the printers that use these, sometimes they don't assemble them correctly, and sometimes they use really cheap versions of these things. So just check it every now and then and make sure that it hasn't started melting. I might still have one here. I don't know if I have it handy. I usually have it handy to show, but I don't think I do right now. But I had one that almost melted on me. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So here is what can happen. Like this. So you definitely, this is a little, you know, this one I think started to melt and I just happened to be there. So definitely check these every now and then. And this was I think a real one. I don't think this was a knockoff one. I think they just didn't assemble it very well. And it got, if these connections become too resistive, so they aren't making good connection, then that higher resistance means they have to push higher current through there, and eventually too much current causes things to behave badly. So do check those every now and then. Make sure you don't have any darkening around there or anything like that, because that can be a potential hazard. Let's see, what else did I put in my list? If you have a Bowden tube, so if you have the Ender style printer, you have a Bowden tube on there. Eventually, the end of it that goes down towards the nozzle will degrade unless you just always print really low temperature. And even then, it's probably worth checking on it every now and then. So that you have to pull it out of there, which can be a pain to get it out. Sometimes, a lot of times, I end up having to unscrew the little coupler that's on the hot end to get the Bowden tube out, because it just won't come out. The way those couplers work, they grab into the tube and they make little notches into it, and when you go to pull the tube out, those notches just won't let it come out. So I usually end up having to unscrew that coupler and just pull the whole thing out. Unload the filament before you do this, otherwise you're going to have a big mess of you've got the filament like welded into the hot end, and you've got to figure out how to get it out of there, and the tube's not in there anymore. So make sure you go ahead and unload the filament before you check the Bowden tube, and just check the end of it. If it is blackened at all, then it's probably time to chop it off and reseat it. I already told you that when you're chopping it, you should use some of these little choppers, or print you a chopper, or something like that, because it's really, you just have to be careful about making the end square and not crushed. So you haven't squeezed it down to where it's an oval shape and it is square with the tube, so that it's not angled. Otherwise you're going to get clogs in the hot end. If you do decide to replace it, it's cheap enough to get the little Capricorn kit, and it'll come with one of these. Sometimes they even come with extra nozzles, which you may or may not need, but it's $15 to $20 on Amazon, so it's not a big deal. And you'll have one of these for chopping it off multiple times, and you'll get enough bout and tube to replace for many times, just chopping it. Make it a little long, and so you can chop the end off. The Capricorn isn't necessarily a better material, it is better controlled fabrication, and so your inner diameter is a little bit tighter than it would be on just what you usually get on the printer. I put in update firmware. You usually don't have to do this, but unless you change something. So if you change, like you add a probe or something like that, then yes, you have to update the firmware. But occasionally they will release new firmware that does provide some slightly better feature. It might be worth it. I would not update the firmware unless you had a good reason, though. I did put it in there as a thing that you might want to do, but unless your printer's starting to get quite old, they probably haven't added anything that's going to make a big difference in your printing. And then calibrate every now and then. If you're using a different new material, you might want to do at least a temperature tower. You might want to just check to make sure that your E-steps have not drifted somehow. They shouldn't. None of these things should change, but it is possible that they could change. That's kind of why I kind of put these two last. Is they're probably not the most important things maintenance-wise, but if you're interested, they do count as maintenance. Here's that link to the print your own dual color filament if you wanted to find that on printables. And I think that is probably good for now. I've been grading. I saw a couple of more assignments come in. Make sure you're starting to get those things in so that you don't have the very last day and trying to get everything submitted. So go ahead and start submitting things if you haven't. It looks like, several people had submitted several different of the options. I did have one question about the contest. In the past versions of the course, even in the winter, I did have a contest requirement. Now the contest is just an option. The class project part with the chessboard, that's the requirement that kind of took its place. The contest, since we can't be in person, we can't actually compete against each other very easily. So you had to go find a random contest to enter. You can still do that as one of your options if you want to, but the class project is the chessboard thing. And not all the pieces have been claimed. Not everybody's, and if you can print the same thing somebody else is printing also, but there's several more of those to claim, so make sure you claim one before you just are stuck with something. All right. The rest of this week will be a little bit different. So I have a workshop. So I think Wednesday I'll have a video about in topology, I think is the plan. I'm not sure what Fridays will be, but they'll be pre-done. So they won't be live. I'll have them ready to go already, and just release them during class time, so they won't be live is the only thing. And we'll get back to live classes on the following Monday. So I will see y'all. I will kind of see you Wednesday and Friday, but not live, and then I'll see you Monday live again, is at least the plan. That's the plan.